I'd say right now, when uncertainty is at its greatest, that's also the greatest opportunity because the old rules are no longer applicable. So don't be afraid to try some new things because the old regime is not necessarily going to be what the future holds.
Welcome to another episode of peopleHum interview series. I'm your host Sneha Moorthy, and let's begin with a quick introduction of peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year and publishes around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest. Rita McGrath is an best-selling author, a sought-after speaker, and a long-time professor at Columbia Business School. She is widely recognized as a premier expert on leading innovation and growth during times of uncertainty. Rita has received the #1 Achievement Award for Strategy from the prestigious Thinkers 50 and has been consistently named one of the world's top 10 management thinkers in its biannual ranking. As a consultant to CEOs, her work has had lasting impact on the strategy and growth programs of Fortune 500 companies worldwide. Welcome, Rita. We are thrilled to have you.
Oh, it's a delight to be here.
Sure. So the first question I had for you, Rita, was you've had such an eventful journey working for corporates and also teaching in prestigious business schools. So can you tell us a little bit about your learnings along the way?
Well, I think one of the biggest learnings is that a lot of the tools that we use for managing under high uncertainty situations, which we've learned from innovation, are now really central to what people are trying to use as they're navigating their way through this crisis, right? So many executives and leaders have never had to deal with high uncertainty situations. So they're really hungry for that insight.
Wow, that's so true. And I also came across the phrase creating growth under uncertain conditions in your profile. And that is suddenly so relevant at this moment. So can you tell us how really can one grow under such precautious circumstances?
Well, the research is pretty clear that the companies that invest in growth and invest in their people and invest, when things are tough, when the easiest thing to do is to just shut everything down, right? But the companies that invest through that tend to really, accelerate their growth once they're through the crisis. I think the most important thing to figure out is what are the new, I'll use Clay Christensen's term, what are the new jobs to be done that are emerging from this crisis? And when you look at the companies that are successfully navigating, what you see is very aggressive pivots to coming up with opportunities that are now more relevant than ever. So, companies that used to be, an example is a company called Timberlane, which used to be making shutters, really high quality shutters for people's houses. And of course, nobody's buying that right now. But they realized their capabilities could be tilted to make protective gear. And so they've gone full bore into that, which unfortunately is now in very high demand here in the US.
Yeah, that's all right. We need to start adopting to what the situation is and make optimum use of it. That's the key takeaway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So, how much of a role do you think that technology plays in the world of strategy and innovation?
Oh, I think technology is absolutely critical. And I think we suffer from a recency bias when we think about technology. I mean, the AT&T picture phone was first debuted in 1964 at Disney World. And that was the first, visual face-to-face sort of Zoom of its day. But I think what technology really does is accelerates. And so if you think about digital operations, they've had a life cycle that I think we've overlooked. So when digital first began making a big impact on business, and I'll pin this to the mid 90s, let's say, everybody had to have a web page, and it was all about Netscape and oh my God, a browser and a .com and all this stuff. And it really started out in marketing. And so if you look at the chief digital officer role at that time, it was oftentimes reported up through marketing, and that was considered to be kind of what digital was, right? Then you started to have digital in products. So if you wanted to buy a hammer, let's say, you'd go to Amazon or your provider of choice, and you'd see their user reviews, and it would say, oh, left this hammer out in the sun and the plastic handle melted. And so now a hammer has now got a digital component to it. And now what we're seeing is digital is really making its way into business models. And that now has a real existential question to it, which is, how should I be competing? How should I be thinking about competition when my business model is up for grabs, right? When, for example, the whole population of direct-to-consumer companies, so Dollar Shave Club or Harry's or companies like that, has now become kind of the way people do business. Or, with the respect to the pandemic, companies like Instacart, that are basically knitting together people who can perform these services with people who need these services. And it's just changed the business model for how we take for granted things that used to be done very differently.
Absolutely, that's insightful. Thank you so much for that. And is innovation all about liberty? Like, how can leaders balance the freedom to experiment and also not let it go beyond a certain risk stage?
Mm. Yeah, that's a question I hear a lot. So I'll have two sort of responses to that. The first is something Jeff Bezos talks about a lot. He says, you have to understand the difference between type 1 and type 2 decisions. So a type 1 decision is very consequential, irreversible, commits the organization, involves a lot of potential downside, really serious decision that you have to think about incredibly carefully. Now, type 2 decisions, on the other hand, are, they're reversible. If you make the decision and you decide you don't like what you've learned, you just turn around and walk back. So you walk through the door. And if you don't like what you see on the other side, you walk back, They are low risk. They're fast. You can do them quickly. And he said the problem with large organizations is what tends to happen is we treat every decision as though it was a type 1 decision. So I think that's the first observation. Second observation is that for many organizations, what you're trying to do is not so much the classic leadership thing, which is, here's the vision, and we're going to go for that vision, and everybody follow me. It's much more what Linda Hill, who's a good friend of mine, calls knitting together slices of genius into a collective genius. And that when you're in a situation which requires creativity and new answers, that you can't formulate a vision and go for it. What you've got to do is really create the context in which people can discover new solutions.
Wow, that is so beautiful. The way you put it, like knitting together a lot of geniuses together. It's really very beautiful. It sums up of everything, right? Thank you so much for that. So before we just wrap up the interview, I would love to ask you, like, do you have any sound bites to leave for our audience for?
Sound bites. Oh, oh, that's a challenge. I'd say right now, when uncertainty is at its greatest, that's also the greatest opportunity, because the old rules are no longer applicable. So don't be afraid to try some new things, because the old regime is not necessarily going to be what the future holds.
Yeah, that is so insightful. I mean, yes, we need to try out new things to figure out what works and what not, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Rita. It was wonderful talking to you. I had a great time, and I'm sure our audience are going to love this too.
Well, it's a pleasure meeting you, and peopleHum. I love that name.
Thank you. Thank you so much.